think this is us.
People want to pick the loaf.
Oh, well.
Two or more young and
I was gonna say the good ones are here.
sheep.
The sheep are here. The goats aren't.
Five even in cheater.
All right. Anybody got any praises, prayer requests, or anything tonight?
Y'all just continue to remember my brother. He's not eating or drinking, so. First mom says they try to get him to eat, drink, and won't do it.
I
But
forgot.
he's a big boy, so hopefully, that dad on him will have to look at him.
I forgot his name.
Louis Mollison.
Thank you.
It's just a Mayor Louis.
Yes, sir.
Yes, let me say this first of all. This is a prayer request for the young lady's name. She's an educator. Her name is Nikki Hampton.
Okay.
Last Monday, I really petitioned God about God put someone in line with me that if you want to help with. Well, long story short, I go to Walmart. Anyway, long story short, I run into her fiance. And Nikki Hampton had applied for her company. She's been an educator now. And I said, well, how's the family doing? How you doing? How's he doing? He didn't say anything. He pulls out his cell phone and shows me a picture of their SUV. And she had an accident in Atlanta. She had a seizure.
Mm.
And it was a one-car accident. By God's grace and mercy, she's alive. But it broke both her legs. They had to reconstruct both her legs. Both her hips, broke her back with three places. And, I know her young was like, my wife. I said, Moses, I said, are you Christian? He said, somewhat. And we were over, me and the young lady was able, I said, is there anything I can do? And her will, about this happening. But they really need our prayers. I know she's been from the Baptist background, but Nikki Hampton's, please remember her and her family, 3 kids.
Absolutely.
But all that there, be careful what you pray for.
If you ask for God to do something and to put somebody in your path and you're serious about it, He will. So, amen. Anybody else?
Barry and Jeff went to the doctor Monday and was still got strong. He got all the reports for all the doctors were making. And they told me, yeah, there's definitely a safety there. So, they're not doing very good. And they crave coming because Jeff feels like he's going to be able to take the guy and go everywhere. Because when he does, the person has to be handled. So, they were sharing on yesterday, they was over there in the background. But she's under a lot of stress as always, and her job too, trying to stay at home with him.
Right.
So, shit, I talked about an hour, and night, she did not cry. So, y'all need to give them credit, and go visit them, and talk to them or something, they really
Mm-hmm.
want to see something.
Yeah, I spent a good while with it Sunday afternoon. So. All right. Anybody else?
Maybe Lindsay had a red started, up in the truck in over in, turned the truck out. He got an all on the film there. And got the hospital and down inside and out. He went to the house. The truck started.
unspoken request? Anybody maybe?
Jim goes to get his last treatment tomorrow for his, cancer. He gets to ring the bell tomorrow, so he's thinking about that.
Praise the Lord.
So time to wear that bell out.
I know Rhonda's mom had surgery today, but I haven't heard from her as to any results, so. Okay. Anybody else? We have much to be praying about. I know Greg Harden, who I've mentioned recently, and he's on our prayer list, and he had a setback over the weekend, and took him down for a CT scan. He was doing okay. Took him down for a CT scan. He had a panic attack while in there and stopped breathing. They had to do CPR and put him back on a ventilator. So he's back in ICU on a ventilator in Augusta. So just continue to pray. You know, God knows these things. He already knows. I mean, we have a list, a long list of people and things. But you know, I think about these things and we pray and we cry out to God for them, but I have to remind myself over and again that He already knows these things. He's already there, already on the other side. So, anybody else?
Has anybody mentioned Rick Humphries?
No, ma'am.
That is Lynn Carlin's husband.
Correct.
And he was having surgery for his heart, and I think he had a stroke.
Yes.
And,
Yes,
he's asking for prayers for him.
Yeah, I did see she had placed that on, put that on Facebook this week, and Rick Humphrey, he's apparently was not doing well, and then today, I think I saw, she said the family was going to have to make some decisions, so I don't know, that's usually not a good sign, so. All right.
You know, with all those people in Jonestown, when they all took, he got killed there, his brother. He was not one of those cult members, he was with the Associated Press, and he got killed on the runway there, Rick Humphries' brother.
Wow.
You remember all that?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't I say where that missionary that got kidnapped, I got him outside?
They did. He was actually, he's the pastor of a church in Maryville, Tennessee. But police went, as they would say, went in a shooting. And fortunately, he was not hit, but they killed the other, whatever, kidnappers, and they were able to bring him home. So it was in South Africa is where it happened. He was there on a mission trip, and he was preaching. In the midst of his sermon, gunmen came in and kidnapped him at gunpoint and took several of the cell phones from the people in the congregation. That's how they were able to track him down. It's because they were pinging the location on the cell phones. So, but they found, they got him out safe, thankfully. So, you're gonna see more and more of that. Anybody else? Anything else? Brotherhood's tomorrow night, Easter this weekend. It's gonna be a glorious weekend of worship, celebration. So, Brother Allen, would you open us in prayer, please, sir?
Our Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you so much for your great love and your mercy that you have on us, Father. We just do want to lift up the name that we mentioned tonight. You know each and every situation, Lord. We just pray for the one that's sick and the one that's standing by, Lord, and give them
back in Genesis 34, and a sister scorned. It's, I believe, again, it's a well-known passage and a well-known story. As I was thinking about this, obviously, as we've already talked about some tonight, we live in a wicked society. We live in a world of immorality and violence, lawlessness. Some people might argue that statement, but saying, well, there's too much good and beauty in the world to characterize it as a wicked world. But I would argue against that because, they're right, that there is some beauty in the world. We look around, we see some, what we would consider goodness and beauty, but it's also filled with wickedness. And we find that from down through history. It's one of those things that, because we think about the decline of every society in history, it's clear evidence of this fact. We even our own nation, where yes, we had our problems, but we become more increasingly wicked over the years, and to where that we celebrate sin, we celebrate ungodliness and immorality. And so, again, all we have to do is look at the current world and the scene of world history, and again, listen to news reports, and you find this dark picture. And but until we face the truth about it and honest about it, we can't attack those problems. We can't change those problems. And so, but we must do both. We must face the truth, and we must have honesty in our minds and our hearts about these things. And so this passage here, this chapter, the entire chapter of 34, that's kind of what this is about, is that until we acknowledge the truth, then we are helpless in dealing with this scourge of wickedness. And it's painting this picture of this worldly wicked society, and it faces the truth of wickedness that's in the heart of man. And so, it doesn't show us what to do about it, but it just paints the picture so that it have a clearer picture. And the solution really to this problem of wickedness is covered in other passages and other chapters here. But as we look at this, and we're just going to walk through it and kind of hit the highlights tonight, because it can be a pretty in-depth passage if you really look hard. But I want you to notice as we begin here in verse 1, this wickedness of exposure and rape that we find. He says, now Dinah, and obviously this is the only daughter of Jacob. He says, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had born to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. His soul was strongly attached to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor and said, get me this young woman as a wife. Now, again, remember that Jacob has settled down. He had the opportunity to go with Esau back home, if you would, but he's chosen to settle down by Shechem, this wicked, it's a worldly wicked city. It kind of almost sounds like, Lot here in the way that, that Lot did when he left Abraham. But this worldly and wicked environment, obviously, it was bound to influence the children of Jacob as they were growing up. And again, Jacob himself had gone against God's will for marriage. He had two wives instead of one. And, and in addition, he had taken two concubines. And so, the children, they were very aware of society's emphasis upon sex and sexual pleasure. And so it was the custom of the day to expose oneself, to live a loose, immoral, polygamous and adulterous life, and to seek the bright lights and the pleasures of life. And so when you look at this, we see what we're going to see is the result or the effect of a worldly, wicked society upon Jacob's children. Now we see, as he said in verse 1, Dinah, who was his daughter, she sought worldly companions. She went out to visit the young women of the land. She went out to see them. She was about 14 to 16 years old at this time. So she was a young lady. But notice that phrase there in verse 1. It says, she went out to see the daughters or the young women of the land. That means young women who were not believers. These were young women who weren't followers of God and his promises. So why would she go out and visit these people alone? Why? Because it was unsafe to walk alone in that day. It was accepted and understood that she was fair game for men to flirt with her and to seduce her. Was she lonely and need companionship? Was she just curious about how the young women of the world lived and dressed and acted, or was she rebelling against her parents? Maybe against the moral standards that they were trying to teach them. We've seen that even among our own kids sometimes. Was she looking for a young man herself, or maybe seeking the companionship of, again, she's one girl and 11 boys. So maybe she was seeking the companionship of the worldly young ladies. Again, the Bible doesn't say. It's silent on that issue. But one thing we know is that Dinah knew better than to be out in the countryside and the city all alone. And yet for some reason, she felt that she could take care of herself. She probably thought, well, I can do this. It'll be all right. Nobody's been hurt. We're good. I can go out and visit and see. But notice what happened. Here's the young prince of the area. He seduced her. He raped her. Because it goes back in verse 2. It says, when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. Those words, took her, lay with her, and violated her, those are very violent words in the Hebrew. When you think about that, again, she'd probably gone to a friend's house or to the place where the young men and women gathered to socialize, maybe a club, what we would call a club. But whenever he saw her, he was attracted to her. He began to pay attention to her. She was maybe, I don't know, did she play him along? Did she entice him? Again, we don't know. But she had exposed herself. I'm not saying she took her clothes off. She just exposed herself to this, to this opportunity. He was named after the city of Shechem and probably had all the young women he could have desired. But the very fact that he would pay attention to Dinah most likely thrilled her, excited her. Certainly would have most young ladies. But whatever, he took her and essentially he raped her. That's the bottom line. Notice he kept her there. He took her to his house and he kept her there. The unexpected happened though. Because it says there in verse 3, it says his soul was strongly attracted to her. And he loved her and spoke kindly to her. Kind of hard to believe after what just happened. Again, this was not just a feeling of routine conquest. He was, I guess fell in love with her after that moment. And so he did what he normally would do. He went to his father and says, I want to marry her. And so that was what they did in that day. But think about this. Think about the parallel with our society today. I mean, we live in a day when people are attracted to the bright lights and the pleasures of this world. They're exposing themselves and their bodies to the point of inviting trouble and foul play. I mean, we live in a day when people emphasize sex and sexual pleasure outside of marriage, and sexual abuse and rape are common, and people are more interested in how they look and exposing their bodies than they are in purity of mind and heart. The people of power, that have position and money, they feel that they can have whatever they want whenever they want it. You see, that's the exact reason that the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians. He said, this is the will of God, even your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual immorality. You know, what a time when you think about what's happened to her. But then notice, this kind of went even further. Had Jacob done what he was supposed to do, then it would have turned out differently, maybe. Because notice, here's the wickedness. Obviously, the deed has been done, the rape has been done. But then notice, here's the wickedness of accepting and being insensitive to immorality. Notice in verse 5. It says, Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. You know, obviously the news traveled fast. Jacob heard quickly what had happened. Most likely one of her friends from the city had told, or maybe it was by the grapevine, whatever it was. But the point was that, when he first heard, he said, because if you go on into verse 7, it says the sons of Jacob came in from the field, and when they heard it, the men were grieved and very angry. They, as any father or brother or whatever, they were very angry and upset about what had happened to their sister and their daughter. But here, I hate to say it, the rapist was the local prince. And so Hamor went out to see Jacob to make a proposal for marriage. I want you to notice something about this, though. In verse 8, he says, but Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife. Wow. There was no apology. There was no confession of wrongdoing. There was no sympathy, no suggestion that Shechem would be disciplined. Here he's totally insensitive to the wrong that had been done, because it says there in verse 7, it says they were very grieved and very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. Hamor had just accepted this seduction as a routine thing. It was, again, no sense of sin or shame or guilt or regret or wrongdoing or judgment. Nothing. Does that not sound like society today? Because, again, sex and sexual pleasure outside of marriage, they're considered to be acceptable behavior. It's promoted as if it were acceptable. They use sex to sell things, make money, pleasure, self-pleasure, and gratification to, There's just all kinds of things that it's used for. People have become insensitive to the wrong of immorality. I mean, we think now, we hear quite often something happening. We hear somebody, well, so-and-so, did you hear they're getting divorced? Well, why? Well, he was cheating on her, or, she was cheating on him. And we're like, oh, man, that's awful. And then that's it. That's about all that's about all the response we give, isn't it? Because we've become so desensitized to those things. And that's what was happening here, was that, many people have lost all conscience, all sense of sin and wrongdoing. We're not grieved for these things, even as God's children. Do you notice this wickedness, this deception? Again, they came in from the field and they were grieved and angry. But then, verse 8, he says, Hamor spoke to them, said, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife. And notice this, and make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters to yourselves. So you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourselves in it. Then Shechem said to her father and her brothers, so let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. And you ask me ever so much dowry and gift, I'll give it according to what you say to me, but give me the young woman as a wife. But the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father, and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. And they said to them, we cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised. For that would be a reproach to us. But on this condition we will consent to you. If you'll become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised, then we'll give our daughters to you, and we'll take your daughters to us, and we'll dwell with you, and we will become one people. But if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and be gone. Hamor is making this proposal of marriage to Jacob, and his sons come in, and they had heard him all about this, and they're angry and upset. And again, Dinah's their only sister, so they're the only girl among 11 boys, so they're very protective over her. They loved her dearly. But they were angry not only because of what had been done to her, and she was their sister, but because what had been done in Israel. What had been done to Israel. They knew that they were a called people. They knew they were a destined people to be a great nation. Jacob had taught them at least the truths of God's will. He taught them at least the great promises of God about the promised land and the promised seed. He taught them the purpose of God to build the great nation of people through him. But he also taught them the utter necessity to keep the family and the nation pure, and this religious ritual of circumcision, that it was the sign and symbol of a true believer of God. But notice, Hamor, he began to speak and made the proposal. But then notice, he says, verse 9, and make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters to yourself. He's like, well, here's the benefits of it. He says, here's the benefits. This will unite the two peoples together. It will establish a great nation of people through intermarriage. It provides mutual security and peace between the two peoples. It provides greater trade and markets and business opportunities and greater financial gain. There in verse 10. Then Shechem, he jumps into the conversation, and he said, hey, you just named the price. I'll give you whatever kind of dowry you want, I'll give you. notice Jacob's sons, they replied, but it was in deception. They were angry. They said, well, we can't do this because we have, our religion, our God says we got to be circumcised. And they, no doubt, they explained it, to them. But they said, well, if y'all are willing to be circumcised, we'll let her marry you. Now listen, they sinned in several ways here. Not only were they deceptive here, but they were willing to intermarry when God said, don't do that. They were willing to come together and take that, take the purity out of the line by intermarrying with these people. Now I realize that they had something else in mind the whole time, but notice, they were going to get revenge, and, they were deceiving this, and they were using religion to do it. They were deceiving them. They were going to get revenge no matter what they had to do. But it's interesting here. Many people misuse religion today. We might even be guilty of some of that ourselves. We can misuse some religious ritual to secure people's loyalty. And, again, how many people have been deceived into thinking that some ritual makes them acceptable to God? As Gwen mentioned earlier, the Jim Jones and the drinking the Kool-Aid, as we call it, that was a religious ritual that those people they believed in. And obviously they, committed suicide. How many churches and ministers deceive people by leading them to put their trust in the church and its rituals instead of Christ himself? The Catholic Church is one of the greatest, I believe. They try to lead people into, that you got to go to the Pope, not God. Again, how many people misuse religion by doing that kind of thing? Remember what Jesus said there in Matthew chapter 7. He said, not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. We misuse religion in so many ways. We use it to motivate people. Well, if you were a better church member, you would do this. You'd teach this Sunday school class. You'd do that. We maybe a building project or a mission project or, again, some program. We use it to misuse religion to secure personal allegiance. To attach people to ourselves, to secure their friendship and their support. We always also use it to mobilize people to oppose something that we don't like, just because we don't like it. Well, you're a part of the church, so you got to be against it too, But you notice he goes on here in verse 18, and he's talking about the greed of the wickedness of greed and covetousness here. He says their words pleased Hamor and Shechem and Hamor's son, and so the young man did not delay to do the things because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. He was lovesick. He was more honorable than all the household of his father. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of their city and spoke with the men of the city, saying, these men are at peace with us, therefore let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters. And only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people, and that it's if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Then notice this. He says, will not their livestock and their property and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they'll dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son. Every male was circumcised. All who went out of the gate of the city. They were deceived by Jacob's sons. So they agreed to the proposal. They rushed off to tell the guys that, the gates of the city, the leaders, and they convinced them that, hey, this is going to be a great business for our city. This is going to be, he's got a lot of money and he's got a lot of animals, and man, we can make a good thing here. We just got to put up just a little bit of pain first. I mean, mutual peace, mutual security, greater opportunities for trade, a greater nation through their marriage. They said, but we all got to be circumcised. That's that catch. Again, re-stressing the greatest benefit, money. So, they're thinking, these men, they agreed. They're thinking that they're going to gain a lot of wealth. All the wealth of Jacob. They're thinking that they'll be able to take it and, man, things will go well. God had blessed him, remember. He had enormous wealth. Again, the society of today is a society of wicked, greed, and covetousness. Their society was no different than ours. But then notice he goes on in verse 25, and he said, there's revenge and false justice, if you will. Notice what it says. It came to pass on the third day that when they were in pain, the two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. Sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their sheep and their oxen, their donkeys, and what was in the city, what was in the field, and all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. Simeon and Levi killed every male in the city. They obviously had help in carrying this out because they wouldn't have been able to do it by themselves. Either their servants or some men that maybe they hired. But they killed everybody. They took all the men, and they took Dinah and left with her. And at some point, some of the other sons of Jacob heard about it, and they began to loot the city. They took everything. Again, here's the picture of a wicked society. The wickedness, a world that was given over to lawlessness and violence, as well as immorality. Again, it's the same stuff that happens today. Over and again. We think about it. The things that go on. But there's always results. There's always consequences of this wickedness. As he wraps this chapter up, and it says, then Jacob, in verse 30, said to Simeon and Levi, you've troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and since I'm few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I. But notice verse 31. He says, but they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? Again, we don't know where Jacob was during this time when all this was going on. Scripture doesn't say. He could have been anywhere. He could have been out working. He could have went out. He could have been upset and went off, by himself for a few days to kind of think about the problem, how he's going to handle it. Again, we don't know where he was, but we know that he wouldn't have given them his approval to do what they did. He knew God's will for the Israelites. That they were to be a pure race of people. He wouldn't have agreed to this plot of Simeon and Levi to murder them. Again, we know because he strongly rebuked them. Apparently, again, had left his sons in charge, and he went off maybe to think about this, or, again, we don't know. Now they have a mess. Even more of a mess. Simeon and Levi had been totally irresponsible. They made the worst conceivable decision possible. He had no choice. He had to rebuke them. But only 2 of her brothers did the murdering, but the rest of them were guilty of plunder and looting. Notice Jacob's thing here in verse 30. He rebuked them for ruining his testimony among the people. I mean, he had tried to live peacefully with these people. He maybe even hoping that his altar and his testimony of his life and would influence them to follow God. But now, whatever testimony he had, it was gone. They, instead of being a witness for truth and love, their name had, as we would say, had become mud. I mean, their name would be associated with deception and cruelty. It had become a stench in the other Canaanites' nostrils. And their, vaunted moral purity became an excuse for murder and looting rather than an example of God's holiness and mercy. But he also rebuked them for fracturing and endangering the peace in the surrounding area. As he says, guys, look around. These guys could attack us and we don't have a big army. But Simeon and Levi, they weren't remorseful. Notice they said, but he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have raped our sister. He shouldn't have done that to our sister. See, the problem is, the Bible tells us that if you reap or sow wickedness, if you sow wickedness, you'll reap wickedness. Again, Paul says there in Galatians 6, that very thing. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that he shall also reap. When I think about this, we can look at this and say, well, they were doing what, they were taking care of their sister. Well, no. They weren't doing what God taught them to do. Again, how many times do we do the same thing? Any thoughts?
I heard from my sister-in-law in England, and to appease the Muslims, King Charles III allowed them to go into Windsor Chapel and take their prayer mats and have prayer. And he's the head of the Church of England. And he appeased them, Ramadan, whatever that
Absolutely. It didn't get any better.
I'd like to know what Jacob, why did he let his daughter, to me, Jacob didn't do his job, in
Exactly.
my opinion. That's where it all started.
Mhm.
Just letting the girl go out is a little different than letting guys go out.
Mhm.
It's the same way with Jacob. You need to instruct your daughter and be aware, should be aware of the danger that she could come upon when she, well, that's just the way I see it. If Jacob had have done his part, I blame Jacob for that.
Sure.
I think that he should have been, I don't know the whole situation there, but I would know, like I said, don't
Right.
give us the whole thing story, but see what where I see Jacob just wasn't too angry about it. That concerned me there. Them boys were upset.
Sure.
Why couldn't Jacob wasn't upset? If anything, he should have been upset about it. But what did he do as a father? Did he allow her just to go out like, do like she wanted? I mean, I don't know. It's something,
Yeah.
Pastor,
it's hard to say.
this story goes somewhat along with the same principle with, David, his sons,
Mhm.
and, those sisters was raped.
Mhm.
And then the guy, just like after he got what he wanted, he discarded his young lady.
Mhm.
Uh,
David didn't do his job.
Mhm.
If he'd have done his job, that other boy wouldn't have got so upset. But see, Aslan, he took it on his own to revenge his sister.
Right.
Because David didn't put the boy in his place. But you brought out a good point there. It kind of goes along with what I said. I think that
Just shows that we've
got to make good decisions, ain't you?
exactly.
In everything.
and don't
Exactly.
be avengers, but
Because of what decisions I make might affect my family. Don't see it at the time, may think it's all wonderful, but that's why we need to be in constant prayer
Amen.
about everything.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
End of the day, everybody's good.
Amen.
What it is, every crack. No one among you not without sin.
Yeah.
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we can condemn Jacob, we can condemn David, condemn whoever we want to.
Condemn me.
Right here.
Yeah.
We
Absolutely.
ain't got no control over nobody.
Exactly. Anybody else?